Welcome to this webinar on Young Trustees Diversifying Your Board, jointly run by the Inland Waterways Association and the Canal River Trust. My name is Jenny Morris and I'm the Restoration Hub Coordinator for the Inland Waterways Association. So today's webinar is being run by Mita from the Young Trustees movement, who will be talking about what young people have to offer, the barriers to actually get them involved with your organisation, and the changes you can make to get them involved in more kind of strategic, higher level activities. After Mita's presentation, we'll be running a conversation session, so a slightly different format, where we'll answer some of your questions, but we'll also be joined by two other young trustees you might be familiar with, which is Alex Melson from IWA and Katie Woodruff from the Canal River Trust. I'll hand over to Mita now.
Hi everyone, really excited to be here and thank you for your time. It's just really exciting to see everyone excited about Young Trustees and willing to learn more about Young Trustees. Just to introduce a little bit about myself, my name is Mita. As I said, I'm a former Young Trustee. I became a Young Trustee at the age of 21 and I became Chair of Board at 25, and I now manage the Young Trustees movement, which is a great pleasure. So I'm just going to share my slide and just talk through a couple of things with you. So first of all, there are many boards without young trustees. What is normal is not okay. Less than 3% of trustees in England and Wales are under 30, and that drops to under 0.5 under the age bracket of 25. So that is the current situation. And when we think about this in terms of how problematic this is for trustee boards, it's huge. It means that without these diversity of perspectives, trustee boards are less able to navigate uncertainty, reflect the interests of their communities, and future-proof decisions in the boardroom. Now, this is our mission as the Young Trustees movement is to double the number of young trustees by 2024, and we'd be able to do this really quite easily when we think of how absurd this is, of the perspectives that we're missing. If you type in 10 successful young entrepreneurs, we can see the people who've been wildly successful in setting up industries and having these new ideas that have shaped the world that we live in. So just at the age of 19, we can think about Mark Zuckerberg, who created Facebook, people who created WordPress, and the people who created Box and Firefox. And that's quite really easy to think about and quite an easy sell. But the Young Trustees movement is also about us thinking about more generally as well, who should be in the boardroom, and why this is so important. And when we say young people, we're talking about wider diversity as well, because young people are not just one thing. So in this presentation, I'll be also just sharing about why diversity perspectives more broadly is really important. So this applies to diversity more generally. So the current situation is often the first thing we hear when we think about, like, some things that people tell us is, well, we'd love to have young trustees on our board. We really get the arguments for it. But surely young people would find boardrooms really boring. And the answer to that is some people would find it boring. But a lot of that statement is founded in stereotypes. So there are a lot of older people, for instance, who would find trusteeship boring, like my grandma would not be interested in it. So there are loads of young people out there who are very interested, and the current number of aspiring young trustees out there who are looking for vacancies, super talented young people ready to go onto these boards, mass outweighs the number of trustee vacancies. And we're just having now many young trustees who are coming from university boards, who are already trained up, for instance, who are searching for vacancies but can't find them because these vacancies are asking for people with 20 years plus of experience. And when we think about over 70% of recruitment is done via word of mouth, or just called for in very exclusive areas, we can see how sometimes this disconnect between demand and supply, and we can very much help with that. So for some people, it's just connecting that demand and supply to each other. The other thing to say is that just because there are young trustees on a board, it doesn't mean that young trustees are going to be fully thriving, because if you are able to add the benefits of diversity of perspectives to a board. So if you were just to have young trustees on the board or wider diversity on the board, but the focus was on assimilation, then we're losing all of those perspectives that really helps the board accelerate. So if the focus is on assimilation rather than inclusion, then we're not seeing the fruits of that labor. And if there's any Star Trek fans out there, you'll see how this is hilarious. And if not, you're not a geek like me, that can go way over your head and you can judge me. So what are the problems that exist? Well, there is problems within recruitment, there are structural barriers, and then there's also problems with retention and inclusion. There was a study that found one of the biggest reasons why young people leave boards is because they don't feel like they belong in the board, or the meeting times like massively clashed with the times that trustee with work important meetings that they weren't able to get out of, that other more retired people could make. So there was a clash in that. What I'm not going to go through today is the step-by-step specific kind of symptoms and problems that we already see, because they're very much the symptoms. What I'm going to go through is the root cause that really addresses these things. I can also share with you a checklist that generally ticks off some of these things, but again, starting with the root cause is really important. So what is it that boards who champion young trustees do really well? Well, the first thing is understanding, why is diversity on boards important? If you jump into diversity without understanding the why, we're always going to fail. So what are these great boards who are already seeing the benefits, like NSPCC, the Mix, and various other organizations doing so far? Well, the first thing is understanding, how do we know information? How does the board know stuff? And that can be separated into many things. First of all, starting with data, then information that colors that data, knowledge which connects those pieces of data together, insights that say, to get to A to B, here is the path that we need to take. Now, of course, if there was any board that would tell you, we know all of the data, information, knowledge, and insights in order to make informed decisions, I'd be very worried for those boards, because of course that is impossible. And boards and trustees are just people who are doing the best with the information in front of them and what they can contribute to that. So if we would just have a homogenous set of perspectives and ideas, what that does is it lowers the ability for that board to navigate and manage risk. So by having a diversity of perspectives, what that really enables is being able to look at it at different perspectives and fill in some of the blind spots that might exist. So starting with that understanding. Then some people say, well, okay, I get that, but surely the board can just bring in those perspectives when they need them. And the answer to that is, what that implies is that the board people there have the power to tell people when they can come into the room. And so if people are not in the room, they're not able to make those decisions and have the power to do those things. So this is also really about who in your community has the power over those decision makings. And then another thing is, as well, you might have exactly the same piece of information in front of you, but you might interpret it in a different way. So that's also a vital key point of why diversity of perspectives are so powerful. And this, as I mentioned before, a lot of what we're saying applies to diversity more broadly, and that's why we're speaking about this. So another thing that boards who champion trustees really well is they know the difference between diversity of perspectives and representation of identity insights, or gathering of lived experiences. So what does this mean? Well, if you were to have service users, or if you wanted to get the youth perspective, for instance, of course, 1 or 2 young trustees could not possibly do that. It'd be completely inappropriate to say to your young trustees, what do young people think of X and Y? Because of course, what is required from that is mass pieces of consultations, surveys, focus groups, all of those kinds of things that enable you to collate a summary of what a group of people think as the best as you possibly can. That is important, and that should not be, it's tokenistic to think one person can do that. What is needed, and what that is different to, is having people with different lived experiences, and particularly having your service users represented in the room, because that affects the perspectives that are in the room, and also affects the way that you think. So for instance, a key difference between this and how that might operate in the boardroom is a question where we might be getting young people's perspectives is, what are young people's experiences or knowledge of current canals, and how much do they use that? So for that, you would need mass surveys, research, those things, etc. It would be completely inappropriate on a boardroom to ask 2 young people that question. What that is different to is a young person in the boardroom saying, have we considered how much young people use these use canals, what their knowledge is, or how this relates with social media, and how that experience is being channeled more broadly. And that is a difference between how the same lived experience can create it is needed on masses, but also is helpful in the specific context of a boardroom to create the questions that are helpful and constructive to really help fulfill the mission of the charity. It's also really helpful to understand that having more diversity in the room is not a quick fix. So what do I mean by this? So for instance, with Black Lives Matter, a lot of people have realized quite rightly that they need to have more Black people in the boardroom. So what would be completely inappropriate is if, say, a Black person was recruited into a boardroom and somebody said, well, we have had experiences of or reports of institutional racism, or there is a decision on how much we need to do something about this, and turns around and looks at the only Black person in the room. That would obviously be completely inappropriate, because of course, that one Black person might not have the experience to say what the solution is. So it would be really important to get in a specialist in that area to fix that, even though they might have more valid kind of thoughts. And the second reason is because the burden of diversity should not fall on the person who is on the sharp end of exclusion. And some people say to us, well, if that is true, what's the point of, if they can't fix these problems in these ways, what's the point of having more diversity on the board? And what that implies is that diversity only is able to fix areas or issues where there is a lack of representation, rather than diversity of perspectives being really powerful and useful to really helping the board flourish as a whole and be able to operate as a whole trustee. Another thing that is really related to this is we often hear boards who say, with the best intentions in the world, well, obviously we need young trustees because I'm a dinosaur, and we need some cool young people to help us think about our strategies surrounding social media, and those kind of cool new trendy topic areas. And actually we have a lot of young people who say, like, I'm like obsessed with governance, I love it, I'm a real geek for it, however I don't even use social media. Do you think I would be a good trustee? And the answer is, of course you would be a good trustee. Again, young people are here to add, like, more diversity on boards is to act as a full functioning trustee. So if we were to just put young trustees into a box, what we would be, say in social media, for instance, what we would be losing is the diversity of perspectives that they can bring to all areas as a full functioning trustee. So for instance, in the areas of financial diversification, safeguarding, risk analysis, all of those kinds of things, that's where the beauty and the magic comes of having an effective board with the perspectives around to be really effective at governance. And then another thing that trustees do really well, who champion young trustees, is they are tuned into themselves. So when we talk about diversity, it's not a neutral topic, and it can bring out all kinds of emotions within us. And if we were to pretend that they don't exist, what that does is it pushes it further down, and then might lead us to block conversations or feel really uncomfortable. So just acknowledging and giving yourself the space to say, this is hard, it's not neutral, and I'm probably going to feel a range of emotions while I'm discussing this. So boards who champion young trustees are always asking themselves, what am I feeling and thinking? They also encourage themselves to think with their systems two brain. So what do I mean by this? This is not something I created. If any of you have read the book Thinking Fast, Thinking Slow, this is a concept from that book. And the author actually says in the book, if anybody's even thinking about like having diversity in their organization, it's really important to use these systems. So what do I mean by this? So systems one is your fast thinking brain. It's the kind of brain that says, oh, I've just pressed a hot tap, or there's fire, let me move my hand away. Systems two brain is kind of when you have a complex maths equation and you have to break down all of those things into further smaller bits and then make a logical decision. And because diversity and inclusion and all of these things are not neutral topics, and we're likely to have a lot of gut reactions and feelings around it, it's really important to slow down our thinking and break down all of these concepts, and it really helps strengthen the decisions that we make. So for instance, a lot of people might say, well, I'm not sure young trustees can come onto our board because it's a really intimidating space. I'm a CEO of 10 years and I find it scary sometimes. And the answer is, okay, let's not have young trustees then because it's too intimidating. It's like, yes, that's a really validating point. Let's change that. Let's change the culture around that. What can we do to make this a really inclusive and wonderful space where everyone can thrive? And what we found is in the process of people using their systems to brain in order to create inclusive spaces, it's just innovated governance and made governance for the trustee board just so much better for everyone in general. And often we hear the biggest advocates of young trustees will say the young people, it will be meeting 2 of the year, the young people have maybe said like 4 words, and there'll be trustees raving about how the board has been completely transformed and how incredible it is because they now have changed the culture to make it more inclusive. People can say, hey, I really don't understand what's going on right now. They have that kind of culture where they feel comfortable to do that. They have received training in their role, and the board papers are made in a way that is clearer and simpler. So all of those effective things to make it more inclusive for young people has benefited the board as a whole. The other thing that boards who champion trustees have done is really ask themselves, am I actually willing to see things differently? Because often when we are part of things for a long time, we're as humans, we don't like change. So we cling to the status quo, and actually asking ourselves, are we willing to see things differently? Even literally just asking that question just allows us to free up a bit more to say, oh, actually I am. Let's move into that conversation. So you've heard a lot of my voice now, and you're probably a little bit tired of it. And so it'd be really great to hear from more of the people in the room, and hear from the great diversity of perspectives we have in this space. Where is the sector on their young trustees journey? What are the barriers and reflections that people have had? And what questions have we had so far? So over to you, Jen, to kind of facilitate some of those questions.
Okay, if just remind people to put questions within the Q&A box. I don't think we've actually had any questions at the moment. I think everyone's taking on board all your comments and kind of points. We'll just give everyone a few minutes just in case they do have anything to add. But as I say, we can do the Q&A at the end as well. See the same thing. Oh, so we have had one question actually in the chat box, was how do we actually reach young people in the first place? And I think this is quite a major point for our sector as a whole, is like building that connection when people feel really kind of disconnected from young people within their communities. Like, what do you have any suggestions for steps?
Yeah, the great news is that there's already organizations who have been building these relationships and you don't have to start from scratch. And there's probably lots of great initiatives happening within the organizations that are already strengthening these relationships. So looking within your specific community to find them, schools, local community organizations, etc., are really just great places to signpost, and often people are really willing to share those. Also, the Young Trustees movement have a free space where you can share your vacancies. So we're more than happy to signpost that on social media, in our newsletter, and on our website too. I'll send Jen a link after this webinar to share with you all with more information about that. The next question related to that is, once we've reached the young people, how do we encourage them to apply? And we often find that the same questions that trustee boards might have, so for instance, what value could a young person with like no work experience, for instance, possibly add to a board where we're making really high decision making? And actually young people will have the same question, like, I really care about this wonderful organization, what possible value could I add to it? So we really need to shake up what a board is and the function of a board, and drill down to the purpose and communicate that message. So how do we do that? So the first way to do that is for first of all the board to be on board with why diversity of perspectives is not a nice to have, but a key part of functioning, as I mentioned, of a good and healthy board. And then we often really encourage to put on events or webinars. People on boards are generally like some of the best people ever. They're giving up their free time because they care about an organization, and just seeing how kind and welcoming people are on the board just helps young people generally see, like, okay, this is a space that I can be in. And also saying why there is a skills and knowledge gap of having those perspectives helps young people feel like I can genuinely add value into these spaces. And then also making sure that your recruitment package young people can see themselves in. And I can also send around to Jen some top tips that we have to do that, and examples of organizations who've already done that. So an example is like having leadership taking part in your local youth council, or being a prefect to school, for instance, or volunteering for your local organization in X. So making sure that it's not like 10 years worth of work experience or being like a CEO. That's obviously it's not gonna be enough if you just put at the end, we particularly welcome candidates who are younger, if you've got those things in your criteria.
Oh, thanks for that. We've actually had another question come in. It says, we find that potential trustees are often very busy with their professional and family lives and thus are reluctant to commit to an organisation. How do we overcome that?
Yeah, sorry, could you say that one more time, Jen?
Okay, so we find that potential trustees are often already very busy in their professional and family lives and thus very reluctant to commit to an organisation. How can we overcome this?
Okay, yeah, potential trustees. In my head, I first heard professional, and I was like, what is a professional trustee? Yeah, so potential, that is a really great point, and that comes down to actually, I have another slide I can just very quickly share, and then we can come back to it if we have more time. Let me just share it with you for a second. I'll be very quick. So this comes down to also thinking about accessibility. So when we have basically a tool that gets people to, before they recruit young trustees or think about diversifying their board, is to break down how their board already operates to ensure it's an accessible space. So one of those questions is how, if you have a trustee board that requires an excessive amount of time in the workday, and that is not paid for, how accessible is that for people who can't afford to do that or be in that space? And a lot of people don't know you can actually pay trustees if it helps to diversify your board. So offering people like a stipend in lieu of like the time off that they might need to take, offering people childcare to be in the room. We've had many stories of young mums, for instance, who've had to quit their trusteeship because they can't find childcare and they care about the organisation. So they said they wouldn't even ask the question, would you compensate for childcare costs? Because they would feel it too audacious. So it's really being proactive about thinking about all of those barriers that exist. So really asking the question, who in our boardroom does this experience like enable to access this board, and asking the questions, what can it look, what could be different? And as I mentioned, some of these questions are just transformative for wider governance. So, for instance, do all meetings need to be face-to-face now? We've learned, no, they don't. And that might actually be a lot more helpful. And so I would always say, we have our free kind of toolkit that you can use to think about how you can make your organizations, your board more inclusive. So after you've done that, and then once you've recruited the people, how can you make it accessible to those people on the board?
So we've got one more question. Do you provide any trustee training for young and old trustees?
Yes, great question. So we do have a young trustee training program, and that equips people with the foundational knowledge, but also gives people trains them up on how do you deal with the fact that there is so much unknown and you're always going to have to research and find out more. We're actually looking at we're developing sector specific programs. So watch this space. There may be one for this sector in the future, potentially in may happen, but there is yes, young trustee training.
Excellent, brilliant. I think that's all the questions for now, so hand back to you for the rest of the presentation.
Great. I think great. So I'm just going to go back. Okay, let me just go back. I got overexcited to share something, and then I realized it wasn't fully needed for that point. So how do you get your board on board? So there are 4 things to get decision makers on board with meaningful change. It's clarity. So creating the space for yes and. So a lot of the reasons why we hear no to young trustees is actually because people have identified really legitimate barriers. So for instance, are people going to be able to meet the requirements and the heavy workload that is required of a trustee? Are meeting times, they're going to be able to meet the meeting times? Like, will they have the significant, like what training is required to be there? If they don't have the training, they might not participate. It's all taking up all of those things, making sure it's not lost and moving it to a yes and mindset. Disruptive questioning to move people from that kind of immediate fast thinking. We can't have young trustees. It possibly couldn't work here. It's too high level. So slowing down that thinking to allow for more constructive conversations to happen. A lot of times it's just meeting a current or aspiring young trustee. I know we're later going to hear a bit more about the experiences in this room, which is exciting. And often that just disrupts stereotypes. Like often the biggest thing I hear is my granddaughter couldn't do this, or my daughter couldn't do this. And as I mentioned before, like my grandma couldn't do this, not really relevant. So just meeting, there is so many fantastic young people, just meeting them often helps to disrupt stereotypes. And then we're also, as I mentioned before, what is normal is not okay. So there is a huge crisis in governance where we don't have the perspectives to enable us to navigate and manage risk and future-proof decisions. So now more than ever, this is so needed. Often this confusion and the current status quo is just accepted as normal. So really just we're creating right now an expectation for it to not be like that anymore, but just having young people in the space isn't going to be enough, or having wider diversity isn't going to be enough. It requires the wider work that we mentioned beforehand. So we have a framework that can help you through this process. It's 4 steps. The first step is agreeing on values. Often, as I mentioned before, trustees are some of the most brilliant people I've ever met. They're some of the kindest people, and often everybody actually has the same values, but they have like just different barriers in their heads that they're thinking and identifying of. And actually, we're all much more united than we think. Sometimes I've heard the most awful things said by people who I have so much respect for, and I think they're never going to get on board. But actually, we're united on the same values, and that enables us to get to the same end result. So starting from that place of agreement and realizing where our places of alignment is really important. Second thing is choosing an area. So the best boards I've seen do not treat diversity on boards as a tick box or something that they're good at, because it's a constant thing that always needs to be refined and needs constant work. So for instance, that you don't just say like, we've got a budget in place and therefore our board is fantastic at finances, we never need to look at it again. There is always so much more to that area. Similarly with diversity and inclusion on boards, it's always going to be taking more work, and it's a constant thing that we work at. So being really specific and intentional about working at one area at a time. It's a journey. You don't have to do everything at once. So starting with the recruitment process, for instance, and working on those specific things, starting on the culture of your board. So choosing one area at a time. Having meaningful discussions, which we'll touch on further in a bit, and then taking the time to action, review, and repeat it. So often, sometimes people find this so overwhelming that it's like, we need to get it perfect before we start. And actually, it's about taking those actions to create change, and working on that constantly. Is how we're going to get there. And this framework can be used, and it is best used with your whole board as an activity, but can also be obviously we know that agendas don't just appear magically, but can also be used on one-to-one settings or to frame conversations that you're having if you need to influence people more beforehand. So how do you agree on your values? So the first step is to be really clear about what is the purpose and the role of a trustee. And this is really helpful because, as I said before, often people, it's really easy to get confused about why we're here and the purpose of governance. An example of how this is this happens within the role of recruiting, for instance, if you have 2 candidates, one candidate has brilliant contacts and has deep pockets and has networks of deep pockets. The other candidate brings in new perspectives that the board has never seen and has got really great potential to add those perspectives onto the board. Now, it may be really tempting, particularly in the times that we're in, to choose the option which brings in all of that money, but that's not the role of a board. A role of the board is to ensure that the organization is the buck stops with them. They're able to act in the best interests of the organization and their communities, and therefore the diversity of perspectives is really important. What that doesn't mean is that you have to lose that other candidate. It's about thinking about what other ways can we give them a role or an influence in our organization. Governance is not for them. So that's where the yes and mindset is really important. Accessibility. So who is able to access and be in the room and benefits from these systems and policies? If we only have boardrooms where the only people who can be in them is people who are older and retired and have the money and time to be in those spaces, then there's no difference between that and an unpaid internship. So even though the intentions are great, it's really thinking about and deep diving into and being willing to ask ourselves, what do we believe? Who do we believe should access these spaces, and should it be accessible to? And when we deep dive into these questions, it allows us to think about everything. So for instance, having an expense policy that requires you to expense upfront is not accessible to people who that is a challenge for. And while that sounds like a small thing, those small things add up, because if you are going through all of these like big challenges, and then there's a train ticket that you can't afford and you have to ask for if it's possible to expense it upfront or for people to pay for it after, then it acts as an additional barrier. So really being proactive about thinking about all of those policies and systems and who it allows to be in the room. Third question is who belongs in this room? Who should be in this room? And this really helps center us in the composure of the board. Should our community belong into this room, or should it be like a bunch of people who have 10 years plus experience? And by centering us in this, we know that it helps us realize that diversity is an essential and not a nice to have, and is not just something on the side that is added in, but is an essential part of a well-functioning board. And then culture. How do we act with each other? Again, do we feel comfortable saying, hey, I don't understand what you've just said. I really disagree with you, and then I'm going to have a cup of tea with you after. Those kinds of things. And as I mentioned before, like when we working on these things in general just enables good governance at its core. And as I mentioned before, people who've gone on this journey have just seen real transformations that has benefited the board as a whole, particularly on that culture point, because when we invest, but so many people have told us that before they were investing so much in feeling like faking it until they make it, feeling like they needed to but act like they belong in the room, that they spent so much energy focused on themselves that enabled them to have less space and time to focus on what the issues were in front of them. So I'm really excited for boards who go through this process, because it is super transformative. And what that means is it doesn't magically solve all the kind of symptoms that exist, but it provides a way that you can work through them in a journey. So I also pass around these slides just to share some of these things with resources as well. But now I'm going to hand over back to Jen. It would be great to hear some of the experiences of existing young trustees in these spaces, and hear from you all if you all have any other questions that have come up.
Oh, thank you so much, Mita. That's brilliant. So yeah, I'd just like to invite Alex and Katie to put their cameras on and join the conversation. So I think, first of all, really good for you guys to introduce yourselves and what roles that you guys play within as young trustees and committee members. So maybe go with Katie first.
Yeah, sure. I am a trustee for a shark and marine conservation, a UK registered charity, but we work across the world. I've always had an interest in ocean and marine conservation from a young age. And in fact, I found that most organisations that I did interact with at a young age, I still engage with them today. So I think that says a lot for capturing that interest at such a young age. It's kind of helped sort of form me into the person and put my passions to where they are today.
Cool, thanks for that. And Alex? Oh, I think you're on mute, Alex.
Right, I am indeed on mute in typical fashion. Yeah, so for me, I'm a committee member on a very sort of small community group for Village Green Society that essentially manages Village Green for wildlife benefit and for people. Again, like Kay, I had a very big interest in wildlife conservation. And I remember when I was signed up when I was 6 years old, I was signed up to the RSPB young youth initiative, and that sort of again carried me through my sort of childhood, teenagers, and through to university, where I actually ended up studying ecology. So that's sort of what was my intro, and I was essentially brought on board straight after university. I was looking for that experience, because you can't get a job without experience, but you can't get experience without a job. So I put my name forward to lead work parties and sort of take on the conservation management of that site. And as years went past, they invited me onto the committee to really give my input into it.
Excellent, thanks. Well, and just to share further of your experiences, are you both the youngest members on your committees? And if you had any barriers, or what's been good experiences for you as being part of these committees?
So I joined the charity initially as a one of their educational presenters. So like Alex, I got in and sort of understood the work that the charity was doing in other ways. And this initially gave me a good insight into the work that charity did, and also helped develop the skills that I needed to become a board member as well and understand how they work. When I took up the trustee role, there was another trustee who was actually a bit younger than me. She was a few years younger than me. And she was assigned to be my board mentor, which was extremely helpful. So she was there to support me throughout the process, and help answer any questions that I had. Would I have been apprehensive in joining as a trustee if it wasn't for her being already there. Possibly, maybe. I do feel as that helped a lot. Obviously I settled in quite quickly, but I think having that person of a similar age there did help, and the fact that she was assigned to support me. Yeah.
Did you find that being already involved in the organisation made it much easier to take that step? Would you have jumped straight into the trustee role?
Much easier, yes. I wouldn't have jumped straight into the trustee role if it wasn't for the activities and the work that I had done for them previously. Yeah.
And Alex, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, so in terms of barriers, I think when I first started joining, I had to sort of almost prove myself as having that relevant knowledge and experience to really input to the committee, because I think often you get that sort of disconnect that young people don't quite know as much as certain committee members of a more of an advanced status stature or lifestyle. But again, it was the way we opened up communications and sort of broke down barriers, and actually sort of been able to demonstrate that I was able to input a greater perspective from certain viewpoints. And just on your first question, Jen, I bring the average age of the committee down by about 40 years.
Excellent. Well, should we go to some questions that have come up throughout the presentation, and hopefully everyone can input into them. So I think one of the main questions that keeps coming through is, why do you think the heritage sector, or Waterway sector in particular, has such a major challenge in recruiting younger trustees and more diverse volunteers? If anyone's...
I think it's those connections, and it is what Mita touched on in her presentation as well. It's kind of the demand is there. It's just how are those connections made to ensure that that supply is provided. Charities need to know how to connect with young people, especially those ones that are already involved in governance roles. So whether that would be someone that's at a school club or a college club, university club, they're going to arrive into a trustee role with that knowledge and experience and those skills already. I think that's making those connections there that's a bit difficult for this sector.
Yeah, I 100% agree with Katie, and I think making those connections, it might sometimes feel a bit daunting, like how do we do that and how do we connect? And it's okay to ask for expertise, and to also if there are particular groups that you need to work with, like getting them to spread the message. So if you're holding a webinar, for instance, working with somebody from a particular demographic that you're targeting, to facilitate that conversation so they can communicate in a way that is more accessible. So changing up the accessibility of your recruitment pack, your board, and communicating how much they are needed and wanted, because as I mentioned before, a lot of the people will be asking, what value do I bring? So disrupting some of those stereotypes is really important.
I completely agree with Katie and Mita here. But for me as well, it's the entry points of thinking at along the sort of the volunteer journey, at what entry points can we really sort of secure new volunteers, both young and old, and actually support them through that journey from potentially from just a work party coordinator to a work party volunteer all the way through the trustee if the skills and knowledge is there in future.
Thanks, Al. That's great. This is kind of an interesting one because it does definitely, IWA are kind of having similar conversations. So about what we call people and what we call our committees. So this question is, we call our trustees directors in the charitable terms. Do you think the term director could be off-putting? And I know we had the same conversation about is saying, oh, come and join our committee off-putting. And we're trying to think out like new names and stuff. Does it really matter? Is it more about your organisation being appealing rather than the naming of it all?
So for me, I wouldn't say it's so much the title or the role itself. It's about how the role is described and put out there. If you come to me and say, I want you to attend 3 meetings per month to give an input online in meetings and sort of have those discussions, I might be less interested, but we make it more of a dynamic role and sort of adding the ability of flexibility. And as Katie had as a mentor trustee, and sort of have that in place, I feel like that would really alleviate the concern from having title issues. But it's all about having the role really well described and sort of the role and purpose front and center at all times.
Yeah, I was just going to follow up actually. I love, like, Kate, you're mentioning the mentoring thing, because it's certainly something that we've done with our Legacy Leaders program. So each young leader has got an older mentor to kind of guide them through the process. And I think that does help, like, give people confidence. And then they've got somebody to ask the stupid questions to as well, without maybe having to do it in a big room. They've got that one person that can kind of guide them through it. So yeah, I think that's a really, like, a good suggestion and a good idea.
I love that, and mentoring is something so easy just to start now. So if all of your board is not on board, for instance, and you want to mentor young people, then that can happen now.
So we've got a few more questions coming in. So both Katie and Alex have stated that they started their interest in areas when they were quite young, but Mita seems to suggest that we're looking at 20-year-olds to join the board. Is there a reason for this age level? I was a board member on 2 Waterway groups at 16. Is that too young?
Yeah, no, just my bad if I suggested that. I think having a younger diversity of perspectives is good. I think it's all about intergenerational perspectives. So you might have a bunch of, like, if you were to have lots of 30-year-olds and nobody in the younger 18 to 25 bracket, then that's not very helpful. And then similarly, if there were just young trustees and no older people, then you're missing vital perspectives there. The only reason I think why I talk about age limits from 18 plus is because of a lot of charity laws. I know the ways that other people have got around that, for instance, is by having somebody in the boardroom, but they're not legally part of the trustee board, but they're still able to add those perspectives. I think if you're a CIC as well, you can have young people from 16 plus.
Excellent. Just see if there's any more questions coming through. Like most canal trusts, our groups are totally voluntary. Do you see this as a barrier to recruiting trustees? Don't know if Mita's got any thoughts on that.
Yeah, yes. I think somebody asked me this the other day, actually, because part of their trustee board's values is that they're completely voluntary, and that's one of the biggest values that runs through everything they do. So even though, like, the idea of accessibility is really important, it kind of clashes with that key value. So I guess potentially just thinking about it in a different way, like a stipend or like an equity fund to fund things like childcare. So just like, what can people do to allow people to be in the room? I think, as I mentioned before, young trustees, there are all different types of young trustees, and many young people who'd be willing to volunteer lots of their time to do these things. With that said, one of the biggest barriers is meeting time. So if you can't change up the hours, it's also thinking about small things like, when are the meeting times? Can they be later in the day or on the weekend, to enable people who are working full-time jobs to attend? So I don't think it's a big spectrum of actions that you can take. And yeah, so to summarize, I don't think it will put people off, but making sure that your policies are accessible is the most important thing.
Yeah, got quite well a kind of a question here on. Do you have any examples of where older trustees have actually been given younger mentors? So kind of switching it up a bit.
And Katie and Alex, feel free to just ever cut me off. I feel like I'm taking way too much space up here. But yeah, like reverse mentoring, where we've definitely seen that, and mentoring benefits both sides. Great idea.
Yeah, just to add in, like, a lot of work I did with the committee is actually sort of giving them a sort of technological updates, so I'll be able to support the technical side of things, but it might not have previously been aware of. So I do offer that kind of input as well.
Yeah, and often, like, and as Alex said, it's kind of like working together. So for instance, if you're mentoring someone in the same topic, so for instance, if somebody's looking at, like, here is our plan to become sustainable and to find income on like X areas, then the mentor might be giving the foundational knowledge and the background knowledge to and talking them through that, like how they make their decisions. And then the mentee might ask some really great questions or say, well, why is changing? How does that affect these things? And that's how both people are benefiting in that relationship.
I think we've got a few more questions here. I think we've kind of touched on it before, but many groups within the restoration sector don't have kind of experience of working young people, or if it is, it's kind of light touch. It's not really like fully established relationships. And we kind of discussed partnering with other organizations. Could you sort of refresh on like which organizations are quite good to partner with, or ones that you've had really good experiences with, or other companies or charities have partnered up?
Yeah, and sorry, just because my sector knowledge is not is not great in this area. Is that for on a national level or on a super local level?
I think it's just like locally, people haven't necessarily, because most of the restoration groups are kind of working on their local projects.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Thank you. I would, there is so UK Youth Parliament and the British Youth Council and local youth organisations are really great spaces to start. And then if there are any spaces where you can build up the pipeline for those organisations, depending on how long term you're thinking, like connecting with those existing groups and pitching voluntary things that you have in your local group, then you're finding people that also mutually have an interest in those areas. So to summarize, if you haven't got the experience, you go to just type in your local youth centre area. They will have some great young people. UK youth parliaments are great. Local school councils. And I think if you were to get in touch with a school and offer this opportunity, that would be very well received. So yes, to answer your question, those are the kind of key people that I would go to on a local area.
Right, thanks. There's another question here. Is quite a lot of the groups at the moment are looking for new committee members, trustees. Is there any particular like kind of format or wording that would be particularly off-putting to young people to apply for the role? Like, is there certain things that just make it really like not particularly accessible or intimidating?
I would say, and I'll let Katie and Alex go through that and cast their minds back to if there was anything that was particularly like, yes, I can do this, or oh, I can't. I think saying X levels of experience, identifying what they need to do without identifying where they'll get training. So for instance, when we're talking about what people need to do, all trustees need to keep the like go through accounts, and then underneath that, just identifying the training or support that you will receive to get that will be really helpful. So just any time where you've mentioned that somebody needs to do things, identifying what support they will have and what knowledge is required beforehand, and then highlighting how a trusteeship is different from a job in that it's a voluntary generally role, and that you're recruiting for potential and people's curiosity, and you don't have to have all the answers, but it's asking great questions, which is really important. I've heard of really great organizations who in their interview process, instead of asking people questions, they've given them a case study and have said, what questions would you be asking about this case study? And what that does is it allows you to assess for people's curiosity and perspectives, and then your interview panel can say, oh, I've never thought of like that, or like, yes, actually we were all thinking the same questions. That allows you to also recruit somebody in that way. Over to you, Alex and Katie.
So I am happy just to add, when I joined the committee, we had a very open and frank discussion about sort of, because I was working full time, as well as my commitments have got increased at work and elsewhere, sort of the very much open and upfront about what I can offer and what I will happily get involved in and what I will not be touching with a barge pole. So I think it's just good to remember to mention that you'll be flexible. That if you can be flexible, you'll be flexible, and sort of throughout the different parts of the year, I'll be more available than in other parts of the year. So it's really just making as much of a flexible opportunity as possible. I would say for young people particularly.
Yeah, Alex stole my point. And that was exactly what I was going to say. It's managing that workload, not making it too sort of like a task overload in the advert or the opportunity, because that will put people off. It is voluntary, it's you know, everyone's got other lives and other commitments that they have to commit to. So it's being, for the person, the potential trustee, to be honest and open and say, no, you know, that is a bit too much, but I can offer this, and just being flexible to being around that, because you will have a passionate person that's going to want to give as much as they can, but it's also important that they don't sort of reach burnout and work overload, which has happened to me almost previously in this role as well.
Cool, thanks for that, both. I think we've kind of got through all the questions. Just give everyone a minute or so, just in case they have anything else to add. But in the meantime, I don't know if Mita's got any sort of key points or a bit of a summary for us. That would be great.
Yeah, and I just really want to echo and summarize how this is all a journey, and the best people I've ever met are not people who think that they've got it right. And sometimes just I think you turning up here just says so much about you making the time to be in this space. So thank you for that. This is like the first action on your journey, and thank you for turning up today. What I can promise you is ahead is a really exciting, innovative governance and a community and just new perspectives that are really going to support the organization to grow and develop. So if you're sitting there and thinking like, oh, I need to be perfect, don't let that get in the way of your first action. And if there's one question I could just throw back at everyone at the audience, is there anything stopping you from taking that first action? If so, what is it? Because we've got about 4 minutes to support you with that. And while you're doing that, I wonder if I could go to Katie and Alex to just, maybe I haven't asked them this beforehand, so just live questioning to summarize one thing that they feel like they've most gotten out of being a trustee, or something that they feel surprised by, or something that they feel like they most value about like being in the boardroom, or found exciting, or something that somebody else has done which they've really valued. So just one thing, Katie and Alex.
Just one thing. So in terms of my experience of getting involved in the first place, was entirely selfish. Is coming out of uni to get that experience to sort of progress my career, and sort of saying now 6 years later, I'm still involved. So I guess what I'd say, the one thing I really get out of it is just that sort of ability to look back and seeing what I've helped achieve and how I've helped advance the organisation in its roles and objectives, and now I've actually been able to make a difference. So that's the biggest thing for me, and what I've taken away of being on a committee anyway.
Again, not copying Alex, who's taken my comment as well. It's seen the journey that the organisation has been on from sort of the start, from when I joined to where it is now, the growth that's happened, the success that's have come from it, and it's seeing those little decisions that you make as a collective have such a bigger, wider impacting impact on a wider society.
Thank you. And then just to thank you so much for all of those. And then just to summarize the ways that we can support you in the meantime, we've got Jen can send all of this information after. We've got a checklist that can support you through just next steps. We've got another training webinar that basically goes through the framework and some of the information that we've gone through in a bit more detail today. And we have a really supportive, I've told you about the digital, and we have a really supportive community of young trustees who are welcome to answer your questions and find connections. And also you have these brilliant young trustees that you you have met today or / already know. So over to you, Jen.
Yeah, there has just been one extra question pop in. So since we've got 2 minutes left, we'll go for this one. So one of the big challenges that existing boards can be self-perpetuating. What is the best way to create step change to a more diverse board?
Could you break that on that question? Like, what do you mean by as in like recruiting people like themselves?
Yeah, I think you know, it's like the start of your previous presentations that I watched of yours, is that, you know, like how many Johns and Daves are on it. 1 in 12 are called John or Dave, and you tend to kind of build the applications and build the role for kind of like people, and then you identify with those people when they come to interview. So what's what steps should you start taking to actually diversify your board to kind of get you out of that habit of recruiting, basically?
Yeah, and yeah, thank you for that question. Great question. I think it is just being aware of that, and I think the more willingness that we have to recruit in awareness of like, what are we putting out there from our emotions and not saying that, and the more we put it in from our systems one brain into our systems two brain, the more that we can give ourselves the best chance at fighting that. I've just gone through a recruitment process myself, and I've gone through thinking like, I look like that person's just like me, they're great, and then having to stop and be like, no, actually they're just like me, maybe that's a problem, maybe we need different people on our team. And I always have to correct myself with that thinking all the time. So I would say getting the board feeling really comfortable to have those conversations, and not pretend, as I mentioned beforehand, that we're really neutral and about things, because we're not, and pushing those thoughts out there and being willing to examine all of those things. And there is a lot that the biggest change is actually quite easy when we think about it in the practical terms. Change in terms of doing that is difficult, and that's okay, and it's a journey. So I think just going on that journey of the board feeling comfortable within all of their processes to move that from their systems one brain into their systems two brain and getting it out there is really helpful. And then the other thing around that is there's just really practical ways of doing that as well. So in interviews, just how do you score and write notes? What is it that you're valuing in those spaces, and then breaking down again like all of those systems and policies, like I mentioned before, that will make things easier to recruit in your like. So for instance, meeting times, if you only have it in a specific time where retired people can attend, then who have money, then that's going to be difficult. So hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that's great. I think we're all guilty of it, aren't we? When we're recruiting people, I certainly know that if somebody on the forum's got, I did my Gold Duke of Edinburgh, because I did my Gold Duke of Edinburgh, I understand the commitment that's taken on, and it instantly makes you kind of go double look at that application, but you might pass somebody else over that has equally as good qualities. So it's difficult to get that mindset to like look wider, isn't it? It kind of makes you look at yourself. You've got to reflect a little bit. So it's really
100%, and we all do it.
Excellent. Well, it's now 1:32, so I'd just like to say a big thank you to Mita for that great presentation. I think it's certainly got us thinking, as that's why we actually wanted people to hear what she had to say. And also thanks to Alex and Katie for sharing their experiences. So I think hopefully people have noticed in the chat box, Alex has put down a feedback questionnaire for the webinar. So if you can follow that link and just give us a bit of feedback, it really helps us shape future webinars and presentations. And so I'll leave it at that and just say thank you very much for participating and putting forward questions. And I hope you found this webinar really informative. So thank you, and see everyone again soon.
Bye.